So let me tell you a story. This one begins in ancient India, where let's say you happen to be in charge of the treasury as the minister to the king. A king who also happens to be your cousin that is younger than you. And if the fates had aligned properly that fateful day almost 30 years ago, it would have been your father that would have been crowned king. And now it would have been you that was sitting on the throne. Did that happen though? No. It was your father's brother that got the crown and the throne almost 30 years ago. It was your father's brother that became the king then. And now, after all this time later, you have to sit here just as a mere minister and watch his fool of a son, your cousin by the way, sit on the throne day in and day out making all these stupid political decisions and have all this influence over the land and its people. Honestly, you could not understand his choices sometimes. You asked him straight up one day when you realized that he was making another political blunder. It's for the good of the people. That's what your cousin said. But you knew that wasn't true. The alliance with all these other kingdoms, all these deals that he has been making, they would only benefit him. Even the people of the land seemed to understand that. Most of them could barely even tolerate your cousin. But calling him out right then and there, that could have been the best course of action to save the people. You wanted to tell him that all of this was wrong. It would only weaken the kingdom in the long run. But there were other people in the meeting. And if you pushed back hard in front of all these other ministers, given how fragile your cousin's ego was, he would surely think of it as a threat. But your cousin, he must have noticed how peeved you were throughout the entire meeting, because ever since then, he had been sending you to all these distant lands to check on one thing or another. And all the things he had been asking you to do are just so trivial that it was almost insulting. You oversaw the treasury. Shouldn't you be in the kingdom? In the palace beside the king? You would understand if your cousin made you the general or the spy master. Then sending you off to all these random places would actually make sense. But you couldn't expect that level of thought in your cousin. What irked you even more was that every time you came back from your missions, you would hear of another deal that he had struck. And every time on your ride back into the kingdom, you could see how bad the condition of the people were getting. The king, he wasn't even being subtle about it. It had almost gotten to the point that if the king asked you to go visit another place, you knew he was going to do something really shady while you were unavailable. Just like today, it was almost evening by the time you rode back into the kingdom, only to notice the starving people that were laying on the side of the road. The streets that were once littered with all these stalls, they were almost empty now, barren. This was not the kingdom that you left behind almost 6 months ago. You were fed up, no longer able to bottle down the anger that was bubbling within you. You charged into the palace with your fists clenched and barged into the courtroom, and when you saw your cousin sitting with another minister from another neighboring kingdom, your fury was now uncontrollable. And in your rage, you shook off the people that were trying to hold you back, and you stormed towards your cousin with your fists raised. He definitely would have deserved it, except that punch didn't land because you were stopped by his guards. That didn't stop you from calling him a few choice names, though. Yes, your cousin was furious, but he needed someone to tell him what he was, and right at that moment, you were fine with doing the honors. But when your rage simmered down just a tiny bit, you realized what you had done, and you knew the ego and pride that your cousin lived with. You just questioned him in front of everyone in court. You apologized. Your cousin, the king, he nodded. Just a simple nod acknowledging your apology, but he was stoic, calm, and collected. There was no other response from him. So with one last apology and a small nod from the king, dismissing you, you decided to walk back home. Regroup, get your head straight before tackling the issue again the next day. Because of course the king was not going to let this go. You just insulted him in front of a bunch of people, and given his track record, you should have been executed right then and there. Now that you think about it, you were glad he didn't do the same to you. Probably because the two of you were family, but it's better for you to be careful, just in case. You were walking back to your house, placing your hand securely on the dagger inside your coat. You were sure your cousin wouldn't send anyone to ambush you, especially since you had insulted him right in front of everyone? But again, it didn't hurt to be careful. Again, just in case. It was already the dead of night, but there was nothing to worry about. You walked this path 100 times before. Besides, you've got years of training and a dagger with you, so you take your time, leisurely strolling, letting the quiet night soothe you. There was a calm summer breeze, making the trees sway gently. It was peaceful, perfect for you to quiet your thoughts. The cobblestone road on your route home, it was lined with all these one-story stone houses. The only sounds that accompanied your walk, they were the crickets chirping in the dark, an occasional owl hooting in the distance, and the fire crackling from the lamps on the roadside. They were the only things lighting your way back home, so you try to enjoy your walk as best as you can. When you finally reach your house, you breathe a sigh of relief. You're back home safe. So you climb up the steps to your house that was standing tall and looming over all the other houses around you. It was perfect for you. So you entered your house, walked around the corridors passing all these intricately carved statues of gods and previous kings, and then you reach your bedchambers. There were guards that were stationed just outside the doors to your bedchambers, standing there to protect you from any threat. You nod at them, greeting them, and order one of them to bring you your dinner. After the fight with the king and the long walk back home, you are famished. You could literally feel your stomach rumble. It's gonna take a while for your dinner to get here anyway, so in the meantime, instead of simply waiting for the food, you decide to make yourself comfortable. After disrobing, bathing yourself, and changing into comfortable clothing, it was time to dig into the food that was neatly laid out on the table. As welcoming as it looked though, you couldn't just dig in just yet. I mean, your mind was still going over the events of the day. You're gonna have to think of a way to appease your cousin tomorrow. So instead of the large platter of food, you reach for the glass of juice beside it. Grabbing it, you walk towards the window, open the curtains, and look down at the dark, empty street below, and then take a sip. You went slightly at the weird aftertaste, but it was too late to complain now. If you asked now, it would take another 10 or 20 minutes for the cooks and the servants to bring you another fresh drink. And it was already too late in the night to worry about all of that. So just shaking your head, and with a heavy sigh, you returned to the table. It was time to feast now, but your stomach was rumbling. It could just be the hunger, but this felt different. It was almost like a burning sensation slowly igniting and spreading within your body, making you feel warmer. Sure, it could be the summer night, but you were only wearing a flimsy, breathable robe. It shouldn't feel this hot. You moved to take off your shirt, or rather you tried to move because none of your limbs seemed to want to cooperate. And that's when you see it. On the rim of the glass, just to the side, just slightly out of view, there was a little drop of thick, red liquid. You should have noticed it before. It was right there in plain view. You slid down the chair, choking, struggling to breathe, just hoping to the gods above that there would be someone here to save you. You tried to call the guards, tried your best. They were just standing right outside your door, but there was no sound that came out. And with your vision going blurry, was that motion in the distance? Hope slowly started to build. There was someone in the room. They could help. As the person began to walk closer, the more hopeful you got. It looked like one of your servants, or rather, she was wearing the sigils that all your servants wore, so she had to be. You tried to wave your hand to get her attention, but she didn't seem to be in a hurry. Panic began to fill you once more. She was moving too slow. It didn't matter that you were frantically trying your best to get her attention. She was just cool, calm, and collected. Almost like she was used to this, like the sight of a dying man on the floor did not faze her. You looked up at her, begging her to spare your life, but you knew she wasn't going to do that. And in your last moments, you see her sitting in your chair, the same one that you had been occupying only a few seconds ago. She grabbed onto your cup of orange juice. She wipes the rim of glass, and with a soft, almost delicate smile, she drinks the entire contents of the glass, not once suffering the same consequences that you were going through at the moment. By the time she put the glass back down, you realized you had been betrayed by your king, your cousin, no less, paying the consequences of a very bruised ego. Did you know that there were tales of such assassinations in the ancient world? Assassins so deadly and yet so quiet, they would just get in, do the job, and then escape into the night, blending into the darkness. By the time their work was done, there was only one piece of evidence that would have been left behind, and that would be their victim. And the poor, poor victim, well, from a distance, one could just mistake them for sleeping peacefully, their mouth agape as if you had just caught them mid-snore. Except there would be no sound. It was only when you got closer that you could see the horror in their expressions. Their red eyes completely petrified, the white substance that was slowly oozing out of their mouth, the one that you had just assumed to be drool from a distance, that wasn't drool. By the time the entire mansion or the palace comes to know that the victim is dead, it would already be too late, because by that point, the body was too cold, and whoever the assassin was, they would have long escaped. But killing people with poison, that doesn't exactly seem logistically feasible. Unless you wanted to send a message, that was. So let's do a general head count, yeah? First, you have your spy master, or the general that is in charge of this entire operation. Second, you would have the potion maker, and who knows how many people the potion maker would actually employ to make this poison. Even if it was just him making it, that's an extra person. And then you have the assassin themselves. That's just way too many heads, and way too many heads means too many people that would need to keep their mouths shut. Honestly, the chances of the assassination plot being leaked are incredibly high, so some rulers, in their infinite wisdom, thought, hey, why not bypass all of that? And that's where the stories of the dreaded poison maidens come in. The poison maidens, they were also known by their names as the Vishakanya of ancient India. The Vishakanya, it is a Sanskrit word that literally means the poison maiden, which honestly is exactly what they were. Not very original in the naming, I guess, but they would have definitely been terrifying to encounter. They were originally relegated to ancient literature, often being attributed to being just a myth or a folktale. Basically a scary bedtime story just to tell the kids so they don't wander off into the night. They were written to be these insanely beautiful women, trained since birth to make their bodies immune to all the poisons in the world and skilled in the art of deception. But it seemed that not every girl could become a poison maiden, though. There had to be a special set of circumstances, a very specific criteria, if you will, that could even allow a girl to be considered to be one. You see, astrology in ancient India, it wasn't just considered divine. It was a way of life. People used astrology for everything. It was completely entwined with the cultural and spiritual aspects of daily life. For example, if you wanted to start a business, you would go to a priest and tell them, "Hi, I'm here to launch a new business. Could you give me the best time for my business to launch so that me, my family, and my business can become prosperous?" The priest, he would then use the position of all these celestial bodies, see how they communicated with your birth date and time, essentially your birth chart, and then give you the most auspicious time, and then you would have a grand launch of your business at that auspicious date and time that was given to you by the priest. And then hope and continually pray that your business succeeds, because apparently praying once is not enough. But starting a business isn't the only thing that people used astrology for. Some used it to set a date for a marriage. Others used it to find the best time to move into a new house. And others for other religious ceremonies. All these were aligned with what the astrologers or the priests said would be the best, the most auspicious time for that person. It is also said that given the date, time, and location of your birth, they could even tell you your life purpose, your karma, and what your future holds. Now, just like how Indian astrology is said to predict your future, or when your fortune arrives, or when you can get married and all of that, it is also said that astrology could tell if and when a person might face their doom. It could also predict when your husband could die. If you choose to get married, that is. All this just from how the planets communicated at the date, time, and location of your birth. So whenever there was a girl that was born during such a date where her future was foretold that her husband would die very young, or very quickly after marriage, it was said that the king would be notified. The king, he would then have one of his spy masters gather all these babies together, tearing them apart from their families regardless of whether the families wanted to give up the baby willingly or not. And from the second day of their birth, some sources say the second month of their birth. Either way, these girls were really, really young. They were tiny babies. So, starting from the second day of their birth, these girls were fed a steady diet of poison. Small doses at first, only a couple drops, but what's a couple drops to a child that's only a couple days old? There were so many that would not make it. But the ones that did, though, they were continued on this steady diet of poison as they grew. Different ones, for a change, and at different concentrations until the girls themselves grew a tolerance to all the poisons. But it is said that their very touch and their blood could kill anyone that came in contact with them. In the beginning, people just assumed these tales of Vishakanyas were just that, fiction. Tale as old as time and all of that. But that's all they were, right? Just stories? Especially because people learned of these poison maidens, these Vishakanyas, in ancient literature. The scriptures that were written in Sanskrit where it detailed assassination plots and deception methods that all these ancient rulers used. But that was until historical texts of the Nanda dynasty emerged. You see, the Nanda dynasty, the Nanda Empire, this dynasty ruled in 4th century BCE in what is now central and eastern India. They were said to be a great military power that went against the likes of Alexander the Great and won. The first king that started this dynasty, though, the one who actually formed the Nanda kingdom, there were several names for this first king. The Buddhists, they call him Ugrasena, which literally translates to a mighty fierce ruler. Very subtle. Some historical texts, though, they called him Mahapadma, which translates to Lord of the Great Lotus. But if you ask many historians, they believe that Ugrasena and Mahapadma, they're the same person. The Greco-Roman forces that invaded during Alexander's time, they called him Agrames, which honestly feels like them saying, I cannot pronounce Ugrasena, so I'm just calling you Agrames. But what's in a name, right? People said that this first king of the Nanda Empire, he was the son of a queen and a very good-looking barber. Basically born out of wedlock, so he was disgraced from the day that he was born. He wasn't in line for any throne, so how did he become the king that formed the Nanda dynasty? Slowly. He slowly gained his power. While all the other kings were focused on military strength and fighting with each other, Ugrasena focused mostly on spycraft. he essentially had a bunch of snakes that worked for him. They would just hide in plain sight, listen in on all the important meetings, and then slither back to him with all the information that they gathered for him. And during one such strike to power, Ugrasena sends a few of his poison maidens to the previous king. The maidens gain the king's trust, seduce him, getting closer and closer, enough that they could listen in on all the secrets, and when they finally got the order to strike, they killed him. Or at least that's how the tale goes to show how Ugrasena came to be with power. It was said that he would use these Vishakanyas anytime he thought there was a rival in the horizon, and sometimes he would use them even on his own ministers. But that's just what people said, right? Basically whispered from year to year, passed down from generation to generation, to the point that everyone just assumed that these poison maidens were just fiction. But when the Nanda dynasty finally fell, and from its ashes rose the mighty power of the Maurya dynasty, people weren't so sure anymore. Because the chief advisor of the Maurya dynasty is this insanely, ridiculously smart man by the name Chanakya. He was said to be the brains behind the fall of the Nanda dynasty and the rise of the Maurya kingdom. His friendship with the first king of the Maurya kingdom was legendary. They trusted each other to the point that the king not only made Chanakya the chief advisor, he was also made the prime minister and the spy master to the king. You see, Chanakya, he was one of the authors that helped pen the book called Arthasastra, which in a literal translation from Sanskrit would mean the art of politics or the science or knowledge of politics. It is essentially a treatise teaching future rulers about economics, politics, military strategy, and spycraft. And within a section of spycraft, there is a subsection, just a small one, completely dedicated to spies. And for those spies, his suggested method was to mainly use women for these purposes because, according to the book, women could easily be overlooked and therefore could get into these locations, and therefore would be able to gather all the sensitive intel. Which I guess is a conversation for a different time, but I digress. Anyway, one subsection of that page lays out the methods of the Vishakanyas and how they would be useful. Now, whether he used these Vishakanyas before or not, that could be debated, but I do find it interesting that these tales of the poison maidens survived the test of time for more than 2,500 years. Ever since then, the tales of these Vishakanyas, these poison maidens, although these tales were very rare, I might add, they just kept popping up in both history and fictional works. In history, these Vishakanyas were essentially tools, wielded and used by rulers to gain more power. They were just means to an end, basically. But in fiction went a different route. In fiction, these Vishakanyas were just femme fatales, often used as a literary ploy to represent the forbidden person that the hero ends up falling for and therefore has to reap the consequences. Either way, it's interesting to note that in both historical texts and fictional works, these poison maidens are essentially tools being used for the benefit of another person, or a lesson that the other person needs to learn or beware of. But if the Vishakanyas were truly real, and they did exist in ancient India, given how secretive they could be, who knows if they're still around? And if they're still around, how much danger would the person they've targeted be in? Would their victims even be able to survive if they were targeted? Would you be able to survive if you were targeted? All I can say is at least this can be used as a cautionary tale to not just blindly trust any person, especially don't trust what they give you to drink or eat. That's all the story I have for you today. Come back whenever you're tired or weary. I'll have more stories for you. Until then, sweet dreams and good night.